Welcome to the Double A Horror Highway. I'm Amy Ketchum,
And I'm Amy Cassio.
and today we're going to talk about the sequel to Nightmare on Elm Street called Freddy's Revenge.
And I wanted to talk about this movie today because I think it's having a resurgence this year, especially within the queer community because Mark Patton has been making the rounds at festivals, showing his new documentary called Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, where he talks about how this experience sort of ended his acting career just as it was beginning. So, in the documentary, he tries to make peace with it all and embrace his legacy as cinema's first male scream queen. So, if you're not familiar with it, this movie has been called one of the gayest horror movies ever. And they say there's a lot of homoerotic subtext in it. But honestly, I don't think it's subtext at all, and I think it's very obvious. So, Ketchum, you wanted to tell us a little bit about the history of Freddy before we get into the plot.
Right, I feel like everybody has seen these movies, but just in case they haven't, 1428 Elm Street in Springwood, Ohio. That's probably one of the most famous houses and addresses in horror movies. Fred Krueger tortured children in an old boiler room where he welded his famous glove. He was a power plant technician with access to that building. Family man on the surface to his beloved daughter and loving wife, he was actually the serial killer known as the Springwood Slasher, who sought out the children of the high school bullies that tormented him as a child and teenager. He killed around 20 children before he was arrested, and after a technicality in his trial made him a free man, the parents of the slain and those still living on Elm Street tracked him down to the boiler room where he had worked and took his victims, and they burned him alive while the children slept to keep them safe and unaware, which actually opened up a direct portal from his troubled soul to their dreams when he cut a deal with the dream demons. After becoming a dream demon himself, he can enter and harm them in the dream world, which also inflicts injury in the real world. This leads to several movies of Elm Street kids trying to stay awake so they do not have to face him in their dreams. In the first movie, Nancy Thompson figures out that she can pull things out from the dream when she grabs his hat and wakes up with it. So she pulls Freddy out of the dream into a booby-trapped house where she plans to kill him. Nothing works until she realizes that it's her own fear that's making him powerful. She tells him he's nothing, and he disappears. In true setup for a sequel fashion, the next morning is overly perfect, in a nightmare kind of way, to let us know that Freddy lives on. In our sequel, when Jesse's family moves into Nancy's old house, 5 years have passed. He regularly has nightmares, and his bedroom is unusually hot. One day after school, Jesse and his friend Lisa discover Nancy Thompson's diary in his closet, which details her nightmares in striking similarity to Jesse's. Jesse's nightmares continue, becoming more and more intense as Freddy visits him and tells him to kill for him. Jesse unsuccessfully tries to keep himself awake while the people around him begin dying. His body begins to change into Freddy and back, which creates a terror in Jesse that Freddy feeds off of. Lisa decides to help Jesse, but must learn to face her own nightmares and control her fear before confronting Freddy. She pleads with Jesse to fight off Freddy, but his hold is too strong. It's not until Lisa confesses her love for Jesse and kisses Freddy that Jesse fights back. Freddy combusts and Jesse emerges from the ashes. The movie ends with them on a school bus where Freddy emerges again, and the school bus drives off into a field, leaving the ending wide open for a possible part 3.
This movie was made by screenwriter David Chaskin, director Jack Shoulder, who did the 1982 cult classic Alone in the Dark. This movie stars a 21-year-old Mark Patton, who had been in the Broadway play and the movie from 1982 called Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, Jimmy Dean, which also starred Cher and Kathy Bates. We also have Kim Myers, who everybody at the time I think was saying kind of reminded them of Meryl Streep. For me, it reminded me of Meryl Streep's daughter because I have more experience watching her in Mr. Robot, and she's fantastic. We have Robert Russler, and of course we have Robert Englund.
And a little bit of history about Wes Craven's involvement. Wes Craven gave up his rights as the sole writer-creator to New Line Cinema in his original deal to get the first movie made. They did not expect to make a sequel, and Wes didn't want to. But after the opening weekend, they said, "We need a sequel. We have the next Friday the 13th on our hands." They rushed into production and they strayed from Wes's original ideas that made it so terrifying, and unintentionally, through the haste, made the gayest horror movie ever made. Wes, in return, was never a serious candidate to direct the sequel. He and Bob Shaye, who was the New Line Cinema president, had a very stressed relationship at this point. He was allowed to read the script and make notes, but all of his notes were ignored because he'd also written the subtext that said, "Please do not produce this screenplay." Heather Langenkamp was also not asked back. Following the horror sequel pattern of ignoring the survivors from the previous movies and focus on a new family. So, Cassia, what was the time period like when this movie came out?
Before we get into the pop culture aspect of this, I think it's important to talk about the backdrop of 1985. This was the height of the AIDS epidemic. This was when they first actually gave it a name, and there were many, many gay men dying of this unidentified illness. And then it was discovered we're going to call this AIDS. It was all very new. So that was kind of the backdrop of what was happening. There was just this terror, this fear happening about this illness that was happening, and it was being associated with gay people, gay men mostly. So if we get into the fun pop culture stuff, let's talk about what was happening in 1985. So this is the year of Live Aid, where Queen was the unexpected hit of the night as Freddie Mercury had the entire audience of 200,000 people eating out of the palm of his hand with a fantastic call and response that you should definitely go watch on YouTube. This event also had 1 billion people watching worldwide through satellite. This was also the year that Nintendo released the NES to North America. Michael Jordan was named Rookie of the Year. The song We Are the World was recorded to raise money for famine relief. The FDA approves a blood test for AIDS. Microsoft releases the first version of Windows, which was Windows 1.0. Compact discs are introduced to American consumers. British scientists discover a hole in the Earth's ozone layer. Time to consider putting away that Aquanet. The book A Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood was released. The Titanic was found. Teddy Ruxpin was one of the most popular Christmas gifts, which I had. It was freaky.
Wow, I didn't have one.
And The Golden Girls was one of the most popular shows on TV. So Ketchum, do you have some more for us?
Sure. Ronald Reagan was sworn in for his second term. William J. Schroeder becomes the first artificial heart patient to leave the hospital. Coca-Cola changes its formula and releases New Coke, which had an overwhelming negative response. And the original formula was back on the shelf in less than 3 months. And famous Route 66 is officially decommissioned. Movies you could have seen in 1985 at the theater were Back to the Future, Cocoon, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, The Goonies, The Breakfast Club, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Teen Wolf, Desperately Seeking Susan, Weird Science, The Care Bears, Vision Quest, The Color Purple, Fright Night, National Lampoon's European Vacation, Lady Hawk, Clue, The Return of the Living Dead, and Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. If you were to turn on the radio in 1985, the power station taught us how Some Like It Hot, while Tears for Fears were wanting to rule the world. Wham was carelessly whispering, and Simple Minds singer didn't want you to forget about him. Stevie Wonder was seeking a part-time lover while Madonna was like a virgin. We learned that together we are the world, and Whitney Houston was saving all her love for us. So, Amy Cassio, how did you discover Freddy's Revenge?
All right, so no shame here, but I didn't watch this movie for the first time until May of this year. So I am brand new to this movie.
Wow, okay.
The thing is that I kept hearing these murmurings about it being the gay Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I had seen the first one, of course, but I hadn't seen anything else. And here we have this event called Queer Horror, where they show horror movies that have something queer about them, where the movie is about queer people or made by queer people. And so there was a showing of it. And then that really piqued my interest. I was like, okay, so I got to learn about this movie. So I finally sat down and, I watched it. And I went completely, I went into it completely blind. All I knew was like there was something gay about it. And I heard that a lot of people just hate this one or they skip it. For me, when I watched it, it felt like I was watching a movie about somebody who was in the homophobic 80s trying to repress their homosexuality, but no matter how hard they fought against it, it just kept coming out. So that was my interpretation of my watch. And that's when I then dived into the history of this and found out all of this information about the movie and Mark Patton and things like that, which we'll get into later. So what about you? How did you discover this?
Well, I think I discovered all the Nightmare on Elm Streets probably in the early 90s, the ones that had already been released at that time. So I didn't watch it right when it was new, but maybe 5 years later. And I did not like it at all. And I started skipping it. So, for 20 years, I've been telling people, watch 1, skip 2, watch 3 and 4. I cannot tell you how many times I've said this to people. And for some odd reason, a couple years ago maybe, I decided I'm going to watch part 2. I'm just going to sit down and watch it. I've been skipping it ever since that first watch when I did not like it. I'm going to rewatch it. So I have a newfound love for it over the last year or two. I can see all the glory in it that I never saw before. And I think my hang up originally was that I loved the first one so much that I wanted a continuation of Nancy's story. Mm-hmm. So it was very confusing to now see this whole new character who's male, and it was very unrelatable in regards to the original story. So it just seemed very disconnected to me, and that's why I didn't like it originally. But if you watch it, it really stands alone. Mm-hmm. It's not really a part of the other ones. Because 1 skips, if you skip 2 and you go from 1 to 3, you pick up with Nancy's story. And then 3 to 4, they keep the same characters, and they continue to try to keep the same characters until you get to part 6. And then part 7 is a totally different kind of, as we say, meta horror style. So for me, 2 really is unique and stands on its own.
Yeah, I agree. I think it works. I think it works better if you can just go into it and view it as a standalone movie from the rest, and just drop all of that. Because like you said, people always it's common. It's common for people to just skip this one because they say it doesn't really have anything to do with the story. But yeah, I say view it as a standalone and you will enjoy it.
Exactly.
So let's get into the history of the movie a little bit. So I've read a lot of different articles about this, and so the one that I felt was the best, and I'm going to actually just kind of draw from this article the most, which was a BuzzFeed article from 2016, which is titled "The Nightmare Behind the Gayest Horror Film Ever Made." So I encourage you to go out and read that article because it's fantastic. So again, I'm gonna go ahead and pull a lot of information from that article. So for decades, screenwriter David Chaskin has been denying that there's anything gay about this movie, but he finally admitted that there was in 2010 in a documentary called Never Sleep Again, The Elm Street Legacy. So, he would deny all of this for decades, but now at this point, he is now upfront about the queer undertones that he did write into the script, and he said that his motivation for queering Nightmare on Elm Street was to respond to the social and political climate for gay people in the 80s. And so without directly bringing up the issues of homophobia and the AIDS epidemic, he wanted to explore and respond to the gay panic that was gripping the nation. So he said that homophobia was skyrocketing, and he began to think about the core audience, which was adolescent boys, and how all of this stuff might be trickling down into their psyches at an age when raging hormones often produce dreams and urges that make them, even if only unconsciously, begin to question their own sexuality. So he thought he would tap into the angst and it would give an extra edge to the horror. So that's where he was coming from when he was, basically being gay is very scary. Let's scare the adolescent boys with the fear of maybe you might be gay. But again, also we had the AIDS epidemic happening, so there was a very different fear happening at that time about being gay versus now about being gay. Again, we haven't gotten to watch the documentary from Mark Patton because he's just it's not available anywhere yet. He's been taking it around to the festivals looking for a distributor. So we're not going to get to see this movie until he finds a distributor unless you can catch it at a festival. Unfortunately, I missed it. He did come here with the movie to Portland, and he did a Q&A, but I couldn't make it that night, which I'm very sad about. But what are you going to do?
Right.
But, his story is basically that it seems like everybody making this movie was gaslighting him and saying there's nothing gay about this. The only reason you think anything is gay about this movie is because you are gay and you're playing it gay. So he spent decades hearing that from the creators, which,
Crazy. Yeah, that is gaslighting, I think.
yeah. So, yeah, it forced him. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit deeper, but it kind of forced him to leave. There were different pressures, but that was one of the pressures that made him just quit acting and leave. If we do talk about this movie a little bit, it seems like in this movie, Freddy and Jesse are intimate, like they have some sort of secret.
Right.
And there's this subtext to the relationship that makes it feel a little homoerotic. There's that first scene when they meet, and he says, "I need you, Jesse. We've got special work to do here, you and me. You've got the body, and I've got the brain."
I need you, Jesse. We got special work to do here, you and me. You've got the body. I've got the brain.
And when I first saw that, I was like, there's a lot of sexual tension in that for me,
Mm-hmm.
And so Mark Patton said during that scene, he wanted to put the blade into his mouth and, move it inside and out. But he was like, Mark Patton was like, I don't feel comfortable with that because he already felt that this movie was very gay. He didn't want it to get even gayer. He was terrified of what this was going to do to his career.
I wonder why Robert Englund wanted to do that.
I don't know.
I wonder where that came from.
Maybe he was fine with it. Maybe he went with it. He wasn't
Right.
afraid of it being, homoerotic. I have no idea. But that would be interesting.
Right. Or maybe he just thought it would be humorous since Freddy is pretty humorous.
Yeah. He just went with it, He's just going with the flow. But yeah, so he said, I'm not comfortable with that, so he just did the around the lips thing instead of going in and out. Okay, so the creators knew that Mark Patton was gay, but again, this was a very, very homophobic time. And so Hollywood was extremely homophobic at that time. And so, being associated with gay content was a very fast way to get yourself blacklisted. He said that it's not that he wasn't being offered other parts at that time, but he was so emotionally drained by what was happening with this movie. He was fed up with the homophobic culture of 1980s Hollywood that he just made this choice where he had to stop acting. These people were instructing him to stay in the closet. There was just all of these other gay men who were just like, you have to stay in the closet. So the timing of this conversation and what was happening, and it was the height of the AIDS epidemic, this all pushed him to a breaking point. So he said that Hollywood looked like a ghost town at this point. You would see people, and then 3 months later they would be dead. And then it just got to be too much for him. He was just thinking, oh my God, half of the world is dying. And these people are sitting here having this conversation about, staying in the closet and that he can't do interviews with the Advocate. It's just not going to look good. And basically, he didn't get into acting for this. So he left. He eventually moved to Mexico and he got married, has a husband, opened a store with the husband, and he tried to forget about this experience until decades later when he learned that this movie had transitioned into a cult gay classic. So he started to see the positive effect that Freddy's Revenge had on so many fans, particularly queer people who so rarely see themselves represented in horror.
Right.
And he was even more surprised to find out that he had become an under-the-radar gay icon, and he eventually came to embrace this. So while exploring the idea of writing a book about this experience with the movie, he started to discover how deeply Freddy's Revenge was affecting him. He had thought that he had put it to rest, but when he started to do research about it and think about it, it tapped into this wall of rage that he didn't even realize was there. So he eventually decided to just go ahead and make the documentary Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, to express his side of the story, what happened to him, his feelings about it, which again, neither one of us have seen, and we are very eager to see.
Yes, we are so eager.
We're desperate to see the movie.
We can't wait.
So yeah, that's a lot. It's very intense. That's a very intense history with the making of this movie and his experience. So what kind of an impact or effect did this movie have on you?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, when I first watched it, it had a negative impact. I was not happy with this movie. But after going back and rediscovering it, which is kind of funny because I think when I went back to rediscover it a year or two ago, I don't think really that I'd read anything about it being a gay movie or, I mean, we can't really say it's a gay movie, but we can say it comes across that way. It may very likely be intentional. But I don't think I'd read anything about that before watching it. And as I was watching it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so gay.
Yeah, I remember I watched it and I immediately was like, this is gay. And I was like, Amy Ketchum, this movie is really gay. So then you had to like watch it again.
Right. And you actually dove deeper about the theme, the gayness theme, which we can get to here in a little bit when we talk about our themes. But for me, I mean, if we don't look at it as being gay, even though I feel that it is uniquely gay in its own special way, it helps us connect with just a feeling of coming of age, as teenagers do, which can also be coming out, internalized secrets, hiding stuff, being confused, which makes him a perfect victim for Freddy because he's got something he's hiding. And Freddy's making him very nervous. He's very afraid of Freddy. Is he afraid of him finding out? Is he afraid of him exposing him? What's going on here? There's something much deeper going on with Jesse than there was with Nancy. Freddy has a much deeper attraction towards Jesse. And, the impact on me also is that it goes back to our own personal feelings that we all can relate to on some level, which is not being comfortable in your own skin, probably primarily as teenagers. And we can debate if this is the true intent of the movie. But the fact remains that, anyone can see the struggle Jesse's having with Freddy and his new life. He's moved to a new town. He's not feeling comfortable to flirt with the girl. He has awkwardness of being a teen. And even though it's just a sequel, it's just a movie from the 80s, I think it's actually a really important film. As we mentioned earlier, how it stands on its own. It's more than just a sequel. I mean, I can think about different franchises of horror movies and their sequels, and nothing really stands on its own like this. So to me, I mean, I feel like it has a really strong impact on me. Like I've watched it maybe 6 times in the last couple of years. Like I keep going back to it because they really achieved whatever they're trying to achieve, even if they didn't know it on the deeper gay level. They really achieved it, that feeling of, even though he tries to tell Lisa, he can't really convey things to her, on that deeper level. Only Freddy gets it. And it's become this dangerous thing where they're basically becoming the same person now because only Freddy has that deep interest in him and is willing to go there with him and connect at this deeper level that Lisa and his family or Grady or whoever, they just don't get it. So what kind of impact has this movie had on you?
So when I watched it, I felt like it was an intentional story about repressed homosexuality, so I just kept watching it. That's what I was getting out of it. So that's what made me want to research it. It just seemed very clear to me, like the entire thing. It's just, every time that Jesse is trying to do anything romantic or sexually with Lisa, I don't know if we want to call her his girlfriend at that point, but, the love interest, that's when Freddy starts to come out. So I just saw that it just felt like he's gay, but this keeps coming out. So that's that's just what was going through my mind, which again, we can get deeper into that in a bit, but that's just what I felt. I felt like this was just a story about repressed homosexuality, and that's the way that I viewed the entire thing. And it was his struggle to try to stay in the closet, and it just kept coming out. He couldn't keep it repressed, and there's just a whole lot of back and forth about it in the movie.
I do like how you connect the dots between him and Lisa. Like when he starts to open his mind a little and flirt a little, or when she's coming on a little strong, that there's this direct connection back to the Freddy part. Because you'd mentioned that to me, and I actually did not catch that until the last time I watched it, which was, the day before yesterday in preparation for this. Yeah, that seems very intentional once you realize that's happening in this movie.
Mm-hmm. So I think as far as general audiences at the time, it seemed like they were let down by this movie, so it had that kind of an impact. Did it make a lot of money? I think it made a lot of money at the time, but people were generally unhappy with it.
Right. So this movie actually made more money than the first movie. And the first movie was at 22 million and this was at 29 million. And that happened because the first movie was so huge, right? Mm-hmm. It was just this amazing creative story. And when it came out, they immediately, of course, knew they needed a sequel, even though they hadn't really determined if they would make one before they made the sequel. But what happened, from what I can tell at the theater, was that it was total mixed response. That there were many people who were outraged that it did not continue with Nancy's story.
Right.
They felt that they were, that the wool had been pulled over their eyes and their money had been taken, Mm-hmm. But, then there was the other side that understood that the survivors of the first movie don't necessarily go on to the second movie. But it definitely made more money just because of all the hype from the first movie. Mm-hmm. So what happened was it was huge the first weekend or two, and then once all the reviews and the critics started happening of this may not be a great sequel, then it died down.
Yeah, and then its impact changed over time. So as more time passed and society became more and more open to gay people, that's when this movie just turned into this cult classic, especially for queer people. So for me, I've noticed endless conversations about this movie this year. There's a lot of articles, there's a lot of podcasts, episodes about it. There's like this awakening happening this year, which again, I think has to do with Mark Patton's documentary being played at festivals. So it's this movie has had a journey as to what it's meant at the time it was released versus what's happening with it now. What movie has had this kind of a journey where it was just so poorly looked at, and then it just became this important film for some reason. For us, it feels like an important queer cinema moment, even if it wasn't entirely intentional at the time.
Right. Yeah, we see it happen sometimes with cult classics. That's what they really are when they become a cult classic, right? For example, Showgirls, that was, when it came out, that was a horrible reception. Yeah. But now it's a cult classic, But yeah, this one specifically for being gay and horror.
Yeah, it feels important, It feels like there's an important thing to it.
Yeah, there's nothing else like it.
Where Showgirls, definitely a cult classic, but the importance of Showgirls, it's a fun night. Right. It's a fun night.
Yeah, for this to be a sequel, for it to be 1985, for it to make more at the box office, this is a big deal to have a gay horror movie, even if it was not completely intentional, which we seem to think that it is. But, it really is important.
And, the screenwriter did say that it was intentional to write those things into it. He wasn't saying it at the time. It wasn't until the last decade that he said it. So
right, and it makes you wonder what the reasoning for that is. Was it just because of the atmosphere of the 80s that he didn't want to tell the truth? Mm-hmm. That the truth was too revealing, or
yeah, why not? Why not just say that's what this is?
Right. Or has he just jumped on the bandwagon now because that's the cool thing to have now, to become a cult classic? I don't know. But I hope it's truthful. I hope it was intentional.
No, I think the thing is that he had to. I think I read somewhere that he couldn't deny it any longer. Like, there was just too much.
Right. Once there's other people who are saying, we know this is how it is, then that last person finally has to admit it, I think.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the themes of this movie.
Okay.
As my cousin would say, girl, that's gay with a capital G.
Okay.
Total homoerotic theme going on here. It's you can't watch this movie without seeing it, even if you just notice the more in your face moments, like when Coach Schneider, at his death scene where he's being whipped, or all the topless guys at the party and no topless girls. I mean, we could go on and on. We can get to that actually here in a little bit. But that theme is ongoing throughout the movie. And even if your eyes are closed to it or you don't want to believe it, you are eventually going to see it at some point.
Yeah, it's weird to me how people have been commenting about watching it this year. Like, you go to the forums and read it, and they still say, I don't see what's gay about this. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. There's just no denying it. And maybe it has to do with, like, they saw it as a kid and they didn't see that kind of thing, They didn't see that sort of thing at it as a kid, and so they're still looking at it through the eyes of the way that they viewed it when they were a kid, but they're not progressing to, like, the adult view.
And I feel like I had that view, too. Like, I feel like when I did my first rewatch, I was still in that state of mind. Like, oh, come on, he's just awkward, he's just quiet, he's shy. He's not interested in her because he's distracted. All that. I was totally doing that. And then at some point, I'm like, yeah, no, I just have to face what's really happening here. So what's our next theme? Do you have any more themes?
I mean, you already touched on it, but I do think, it's not just specifically gay, but, you could also say that it's about discovering your sexuality, because anytime he's doing anything sexual, Freddy starts to come out.
Right, and that kind of goes back to the horror formula that we've talked about before in other episodes of, once your mind starts becoming sexual, that's when the killer arrives, because you're distracted. You're focusing on this other thing. So I would add, awkward teen life, hiding your true self, being misunderstood, harboring a secret. That type of theme is happening. We also have the heat and fire theme, which was new. They didn't do that in part one. Like, his house is really hot all the time. At the pool party, there's lots of fire when Freddy's there. And I think this is because Freddy is crossing over into our world. So we didn't see that in the first movie. So in the second movie now, because he was burned to death and he worked in a boiler room, we have this heat that's following him around.
Do you think it's a theme to say that this movie is about a helpless guy who is being saved by a woman? Or is that...
That's interesting.
Would you file that under something else? Because, yeah, it's like the man is helpless in this, and the woman is the one that's trying to get him out of this. Right. Which you don't usually see, especially... I don't know that you would see that in 1985.
Right, yeah. So it's like a role reversal. In one of our opening scenes... one of the first things that we hear, before we ever hear him speak, is he screams. He lets out this blood-curdling, high-pitched, kind of feminine, we could say, scream. There's a complete role reversal happening here. Like, I can't think of any other movie with a male scream queen, and he's so good.
I can't
His
either.
His screams are so good.
Yeah, he has fantastic screams.
I think we've got a theme of unrequited love. Like, I never feel this whole movie that he is in love with Lisa.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel it.
Me either.
I mean, even in the final scene where she says she loves him and she kisses Freddy to try to make him come out of his body.
Come back to me, Jesse. I love you. Come back to me.
You start.
I'm just not feeling it.
Same.
If there was a great love story throughout the movie and then she does that, it would be totally different. But I just felt that was kind of an moment.
Very forced.
Ending. Yeah, very forced.
Why does she love him anyway? I mean, what kind of experience have they even had together?
Right. So to me, that was some type of theme, unrequited love. Mm-hmm. And crazy animals. We had the birds in their house that go crazy. We had dogs that had human faces on them.
Those were so creepy.
We had rats that might have been possessed. And then we had cats that were eating the rats that were possessed. And then my last theme, I'm just going to throw it out there, which ties into the unrequited love, is, in Buffy. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with Buffy. At the end of season 6, Xander's the only one that can stop Willow and her power, right? And he brings up the yellow crayon, and that makes her, basically return to herself. That's exactly how I felt with Lisa saying that she loved him. Like, I'm not for sure what that's called, but that's some type of formula where they have the magic words that make the bad stuff crumble.
Except it didn't come across as real because they don't have a real relationship in this movie.
Exactly. You know, and
They don't have the emotional connection.
right in the Buffy universe. You know, he mentions the yellow crayon that one of them had asked to borrow from the other in kindergarten, and it just, you know, like that is real. That's a real moment of connecting. Hers was not by telling her that she loved him. I just wasn't feeling it.
Teenager that's in love, I guess. That's
Yeah.
all you can chalk it up to.
Yeah, definitely. So, the monster and its rules.
Oh, man.
Would you like to go first on this one?
Oh, no, I mean, go for it. You are the Nightmare on Elm Street expert.
Okay, well, he's what's called a dream demon. So, he can be harmed, but he cannot be killed. But he was killed in number 6. But in number 7, it's a whole new nightmare. So, he's not really killed, right? But maybe he was killed in 6. Because 7 is totally disconnected from 6 in a totally different way. But you haven't seen 7, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah,
talk
I've only
about
watched
that.
up to part 3.
Well, I'll just say it real quick. Scene 7 is real life, and Wes is talking about creating a new Freddy movie. So things start happening in their real lives as he's writing the new script. So it's a totally different kind of thing. They actually, you know, Heather plays Heather Langenkamp instead of playing Nancy Thompson. You know, they play themselves.
So
it's
is Wes
an
Craven
interesting-
actually in the movie?
Yes. Wes
Oh.
Craven's in the movie. It's a really good movie. I really enjoy it.
Do you think that you need to watch the others before watching this one?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's straight up that meta horror style, as we've talked about before on here, where there's rules. And as the rules happen, things start happening in the movie. So yeah, Freddy, each movie they try to kill him, he cannot be killed. He can be harmed. And this is another case of that. So even though she says she loves Jesse and, Freddy disappears, most likely he's going to come back in a part 3. So he's fueled by their fear. That is what he feeds off of. You know, we can look at it as, you know, if this were real life, if he had, since we know his history with children, we can assume that he was feeding off of their fear. So in this dream world, he's feeding off their fear. That's what attracts him. So he attacks you when you are the most vulnerable, which is in your dreams. Things are different with Jessie, though. Maybe because Nancy pulled Freddy out of her dream in the previous movie, which might have activated a greater power of some sort. That's my assumption. Or maybe it's because Jessie is deeply conflicted, which creates a special kind of anxiety and fear that Freddy can feed off of better.
Yeah, it's like people seem to be very upset by this because they say he doesn't follow the rule. He's supposed to be in your dreams, but in this one he is attacking people outside of their dreams. So that's another reason why people hate on this movie.
Right. So, I mean, for me, I feel like it's because Nancy pulled him out. Mm-hmm. Like he's somewhere in between, and then Jesse just has the right formula. Mm-hmm. You know, he is the recipe that Freddy needs. And it could be that maybe Freddy can sense something in Jesse, which leads him to believe that Jesse could be a good killer if Freddy could actually get inside of him. And maybe Freddy gets more of a thrill out of killing in real life than he does in the dreams. Mm-hmm. So he's just taking full advantage of taking over this person's body who is weak due to their own insecurities and awkwardness. So that's the monster and his rules. You know, the most basic of Freddy is don't fall asleep. Stay awake. You cannot kill him. So I think we should discuss the queer aspect specifically to how it plays out in the scenes of the movie. Like, what is it when we watch this movie that makes us feel that it's super gay? So I've written out a few notes here of, you know, if just one of these things happened in this movie, I would probably think it's a little gay.
Mm-hmm.
The opening scene, he's very awkward. He's on the bus, but this is not how he is in real life. I mean, it's an awkward, strange scene. His hair looks greasy. He's got black eyeliner on. I'm not for sure why. And he's like holding his book to his chest maybe, and he just looks like he is very uncomfortable, very shy, doesn't want to be there. So to me, this is how he perceives himself. Because the rest of the movie, he doesn't look like this, you know, and we're led to believe that he has friends, that he's likable. So to me, that was the first something a little gay is happening here, or at least something with his own self-esteem is happening here internally, that he perceives himself as this person on this bus.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is his hot bedroom. It leads to things that are a little gay, like him doing a weird dance scene, which we can get to here in a little bit. I believe there's a scene of him walking around in his underwear just because he's so hot in this room.
Yes, when he wakes up in the morning at the beginning, he is in his underwear and he's adjusting himself as he gets out of bed and moves around.
So this hot theme continues. We've got lots of sweaty guys throughout the movie, like Grady. Right before Freddy kills him, he's topless and sweaty and pressed against the wall.
Yeah, and I want to say that none of these things are inherently gay, but it's the combination of all of them throughout this movie where you're like, this overall picture is very gay.
Right, exactly.
So go on.
At the pool party, the guys are topless, short shorts. I'll throw it out there. They stereotypically look like gay male fashion back in the early 80s, some of them. But, that's questionable, whatever. It's just fashion. But the fact that there are no topless women in this movie, but there's plenty of topless men. There's even 2 scenes of bare male butts in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
But, it was a real theme in the early 80s, at least, for the horror to always have a topless woman. So, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1 has a topless scene, as does Part 3. Why would that happen? We don't know. But there definitely were no topless women in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that really is truly gay is when Grady says, and a lot of people don't catch this, because I've been listening to other podcasts about this. I don't know if I've told you that. But no one has really mentioned this. At the beginning of the movie, when they have their little fight and Grady pulls down his pants, Coach Snyder has them doing push-ups or something. And he says, how long is he going to make us do this? And Grady says, oh, he gets, a kick out of this. He gets a thrill out of this. And then he offers up that Coach Snyder hangs out at an S&M bar.
Right, yeah.
Like he flat out says it. So they're already setting us up for something to do with the coach, at least.
Yeah, I thought there was a joke there about him liking guys. They made a joke about the coach being into men. I'm going to, I would have to go back and watch, but I thought that that's what I heard.
How much longer do you think he's going to keep us out here?
It could be all night. The guy gets his rocks off like this. Hangs around queer S&M joints downtown. He likes pretty boys like you.
Get out of here.
Okay, so then that leads us to Snyder's death, which, is a dream sequence where I believe we're in a dream sequence. This movie's kind of hard to determine when are dream sequences and when are scenes where Freddy is just coming through Jesse's body. But Jesse, for some reason, goes to the S&M bar where Snyder's at, which is kind of odd when you think about it. Why would he even go there? And why would he go there if he thought his coach was there? But he goes to this bar, and this ends up leading us to Snyder's death back at the school, where he's in his office and balls are attacking him.
Oh, yeah.
Which,
balls. Balls.
Okay. It's just something in his office probably. But why does he have so many balls in his office? They're on all the bookshelves, different sizes, and they just start hitting him.
They could have chosen to kill him in, many ways, but they chose to
Right.
use balls. But go on.
And then his hands are wrapped by jump ropes that drag him to the shower, and he's standing there completely naked with his bare butt to us, and they're whipping him, I guess, to tie in the S&M part of it.
Yeah.
So that whole thing with Snyder, that was very obvious and just kind of strange to put into a movie or into a horror movie at all. I'm not for sure who walks in and says, let's make a character who hangs out at an S&M bar, in the middle of Nightmare on Elm Street. It's strange. And then, of course, Jesse does not seem interested in Lisa as more than a friend. Mm-hmm. We're led to believe he's too shy or he's distracted by Freddy to care much about flirting. Yet he runs to Grady's house and jumps on top of him in bed to talk about Freddy. And Grady says, "And now you want to sleep with me?"
Something is trying to get inside my body.
Yeah, and she's female, and she's waiting for you in the cabana. And you want to sleep with me.
And then obviously Freddy's seducing Jesse with the knives on his lips, as you mentioned earlier. But, Freddy often seduces his victims in these movies. That is a common trait of Freddy in general. it just felt different in this movie because the victim is now male. Mm-hmm. You know, but that is a common thing of him to try to kind of seduce him and play with him. You know, he's playing with his toy before he kills it, so to speak, like a cat would play with its mouse.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, one of the last things that I could say about it feeling gay is that, like you mentioned before, we have a male doing this typical scream queen role. And, you know, it's not gay to do that, but, and of course, like now in 2019, like the gender roles have changed and expanded where, you know, it's more acceptable to be more masculine or more feminine no matter how you identify with your gender. But, you know, for this being something from 1985, like it felt gay. Because typically when somebody, if you have a male acting more feminine in 1985, it came across to be more on the gay side of things because, again, we didn't have the openness that we have now about gender and expressing different aspects of gender. Like, there were just some traditional ways that things were in 1985, and the way that it felt very different. You know, he was channeling a more feminine energy, which you didn't see at that time. Like you mentioned, he has that great scream.
Well, before I knew that Mark Patton was gay, in real life, I really wanted him to be. Like, when I went back and watched this and I saw how gay it was, I was like, oh my God, if this guy is not gay, it's going to be so disappointing, you know? Like, I was so happy to find out that he was really gay. Like, it just put these pieces together more like, okay, this is a part of all of this. And also, you know, traditionally in horror, we see like muscle dudes. Yeah. And I think, and usually they're like meatheads, or whatever you want to call them, you know, beefy and dumb, that type of character. And I think it's because when you present someone who's really strong and big, and someone like a Freddy or a Jason kill them, then it puts a new kind of fear in you. Like, wow, the big strong guy couldn't take them on, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's like, this is a totally different kind of male character in general in horror.
Yeah. And I think I would probably have a different interpretation of this movie if it came out today, because again, 2019 is much different than 1985 with gayness and gender, and, you know, there's way more openness and people experimenting all across the spectrum, or like, you know, just not boxing themselves into being one or the other. People are taking different aspects of different areas of gender and queerness and putting it into their lives. And so this movie would not be interpreted the same for me today if it was released today as I see it in 1985. I'm looking at it through 1985's eyes when I watch it. So if I saw it today, you know, I wouldn't assume that character is gay.
Right, exactly. All right, so in this movie, our music is not traditional Nightmare on Elm Street music. And they play a couple of songs that stand out to us.
Yeah, they don't play any of the original Nightmare on Elm Street movie music in this movie. I think it's probably the only movie that doesn't have the standard Nightmare on Elm Street music.
Right. It still was eerie and captivating, though. You know,
yeah.
They still were able to capture it.
Yeah. But yeah, my first... the song that stood out the most to me immediately was during the dance scene when he's dancing to Touch Me All Night Long. Because for me, I was obsessed with that song in the 90s, but it was the Kathy Dennis version, and I had no idea that wasn't her original song. So I was floored because I was like, it's 1985, I'm hearing this song. So I had to like go out and research it and be like, who is this? What is this? Because I thought it was fantastic. I was like, this is a different kind of version that I've never heard before. So then, yeah, this is performed by Wish, which is featuring Fonda Rae. And Kathy Dennis is the cover, which is, it just blew my mind. What about you? Do you have any relationship to that song?
Well, when I heard it, it didn't pop out to me immediately that it was Kathy Dennis, but I was just like, oh yeah, I know this song. And I don't think I'd ever heard the original. I think I'm also just hearing Kathy Dennis in my head.
Yeah, but I love it. I love that version. So I've been listening to it regularly since I discovered that one.
Well, the song that stood out to me is at the very end, which is Do You Ever See a Dream Walking? which is a song from 1933. I think like 4 or 5 people recorded it that same year, which happens when a song is considered a standard, but we don't need to get into all that. But what stands out to me about that song is another horror movie, which I don't know if you've seen, called The Lady in White, and it's from 1988. And that song is a big part of that movie. And that is a terrifying movie. If you've never seen it, I would highly recommend it. So when I heard that playing in the credits, it just creeped me out because all I can think about is that other movie. It's a pretty creepy little song, but it makes sense for a Freddy movie. Have you ever seen A Dream Walking? He's now crossed over from dream to real life. So I think it's now time to discuss the ending. What did you think about the ending?
Well, it feels like there's 2 endings. So we have the ending where Jesse's trying to fight Freddy with Lisa, and we're in the, what would you say they're in? What is that location?
The boiler room?
Yeah, so they're in there, but then we also have that ending with, like, the bus, which we could talk about in a minute.
Right, yes.
But for the first ending, the first part of the ending, I should say, again, like we've already touched on, that it didn't feel that authentic for me emotionally because I didn't feel like they had an emotional connection because they didn't show us the 2 of them having an emotional connection. They just showed us these 2 characters getting together and constantly being broken apart because of Freddy coming out.
Right.
So we never actually see many real emotional moments. But anyway, I kind of saw it like, is Lisa trying to erase the gay from him, or is she trying to tell him to accept the gay and be himself?
He can't hold you, Jesse. He's losing his grip. You can get out.
He'll die with me.
It's like you could see it either way, and then the gay comes out to try to kill. You could see it as like the gay is coming out to try to kill her. I mean, I don't know. It's like you could take it however you want, I suppose. Like it could go either way for me. That's kind of how I was viewing it.
And when she told him she loved him at the end and kissed him, was that him trying to repress the gay?
Yeah, I mean,
is he trying to accept this relationship with her and repress what else is going on inside of him, which makes Freddy disappear?
Yeah, it's like, did Freddy disappear because he accepted himself as being gay, or did he disappear because he repressed the homosexual part of him again? But then that would go into the next ending, is that Freddy comes out again, so really, I think he was just repressing his sexuality again.
So I felt that the lead up to that scene was pretty horrible. We've got these devil dogs that are basically Rottweilers with some type of human baby face mask on their head.
My notes call them the WTF dogs.
Right. I've never seen anything quite like that in a movie, and I thought it was so ridiculous and horrible. And I felt like, are we in a dream or are we in reality? And I think we're supposed to be in reality. So it made me feel like because Freddy has crossed over, that some of this stuff is coming with him. Like she sees the possessed rats and cats in that same building. So it's like, is this the new reality? If he hangs out in this world, are they going to start seeing this type of stuff all the time? As I mentioned earlier, the yellow crayon moment was completely not believable when she said she loved him. It just did nothing for me. And, I mean, that whole scene in the boiler room did nothing for me. The sunny morning ending after the boiler room scene, it's too perfect.
Yeah.
And it's just like the first movie. That's exactly how the first movie ends, right? She comes out, it's too perfect, and she's happy. In this movie, he's happy to the point that I think he's like jumping up and with his arms up and down.
As he goes to the bus.
Right, he's so happy, and he gets on the bus, and everybody's so happy. And so it's too perfect. So obviously, we're going to learn that it is a dream sequence. Yeah, so it's too perfect. It's obviously a dream state, and we find that out as they continue on their journey on this bus, which leaves it open for a part 3.
For me, I felt like it was a weird ending. Like the actual ending when they just drive into a field. I was just like, what is that? Because it wasn't very dramatic. Like they just drive into a field. They didn't drive off a cliff or do anything super dangerous. They just started driving through a field.
Right.
So that was a little sad to me because it just wasn't that dramatic.
I think that was supposed to just connect it back to the beginning. Like that's how it started as well, right? The bus goes off into the field. So I think it was just supposed to show us that they'd gone this full circle. Like he just could not get away from this.
Okay.
That's all I could make of it because I thought it was pretty bad too.
Well, that sounds better to tie it together.
Right.
So I think next up we have our favorite kills. Is that where we're at?
Yes. Favorite kills. My favorite kill was the birds.
Really? Why?
Well, because what happens is, what we see happen is that it's time for the birds to go to sleep. And they hang the black cloth over the cage. And then just a few moments later, the birds start going crazy. Like the room gets hot, the birds go crazy, and then they come out of their cage and they're crazy. But what I liked about that scene is when the little sister of Jesse says, "Quiet, they're sleeping." And it just sent this whole thing into my head that these birds are having nightmares about Freddy. Maybe they really weren't.
Oh.
But it just crossed my mind. Like they fall asleep and now they're like being possessed and they're acting crazy.
Yeah.
And it just added this whole element to me that even the animals can be affected by Freddy. That's why it was my favorite. And it's also homage back to Alfred Hitchcock and The Birds.
Of course.
Where the birds are attacking people.
Yeah, I like that you say that because I just thought it was really weird and that it didn't fit in at all with the movie to just have that whole bird scene.
Right.
Other than them forcing it to have like an Alfred Hitchcock reference.
Right, and it could be because later we see the devil dogs and the rats and the cats. Maybe this tied into that of he is having an effect on animals.
Yeah, I like that theory. So my favorite kill is the coach shower kill, where he is attacked by balls, he's tied up with the rope, he is stripped naked and whipped with towels, and then killed by Freddy. So that's my favorite kill.
Right, you got lots going on with that kill.
Yeah. Do you have any other favorite kills?
No, that was it. I mean, there's not really a lot of kills happening in this movie. I mean, we've got
Right.
Grady. He could kill Lisa. He probably should have. That would make it more interesting, but he didn't. Did anybody die at the pool party? I don't remember.
I can't remember.
He says, "You are all my children now." And I don't think he kills them.
You are all my children now.
And he leaves. He just walks through the fence. He's like on fire, and he walks through the fence. Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of kills happening in this movie. I mean, the final kill, the friend, I don't remember her name, on the bus at the end, and his claw pops out of her chest. That's a pretty fun kill because before it happens, you can already see it coming. You know, you can see it moving around in her shirt. It's very poorly done.
Really? I'm gonna have to rewatch this movie
It's hilarious.
after we're done recording.
I do like that. Like when you find something in a movie that's just done so bad that you see it, you know? Like in part 1, when Nancy's running up the stairs and her feet are falling through the steps, they're like marshmallows. And what I read was that Wes Craven did not want to do it that way. And he actually got in a big enough argument with Bob Shea, the president of New Line Cinema, that either Wes just walked out of the room and said, "You do it," or, you know, maybe it wasn't that aggressive, but he basically told him, "You do it. I don't want to be a part of it." And to me, that is the worst scene in Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, that's the only scene in that movie that I think is just horribly done. So it's interesting that it's not his, because you can see before she takes her next step, you can already see the step of marshmallow goo before her foot steps into it. You know, it's just very poorly done. So yeah, the poorly done death at the end of the movie was probably my second favorite death, just because it's so ridiculous.
All right, so I think that would lead us to the fun facts and the trivia. And my first fun fact about that, of course, is I'm going to bring this movie up again, which is Risky Business, because the dance scene was inspired by Risky Business.
Now, I don't think you've brought up Risky Business yet. I think you brought it up to me previously, but I don't think you've mentioned it yet.
I brought it up in summer of '84 because the music
Oh, yes, you're
is
right.
very similar.
You're right. So this is the second movie where we get to talk about Risky Business.
Yeah, we might as well just talk about Risky Business as a bonus
Right.
episode, even though it has nothing to do with horror.
Oh, I don't know. We could probably put a spin on it somehow.
Well, kinda, maybe.
Freddy only appears for 13 minutes.
Is it like that for all of the movies where he's just in it for a very short period of time?
I don't think so. I'm thinking he's in it a lot more than all the other ones. It's just this one.
Okay.
And I'd read that he at first they didn't want to use him because there were a lot of problems with this movie, if you ask me, as far as working with the original people. But it seemed like they didn't want to use him for all the scenes, maybe because he was too expensive, because he was coming on from the previous movie and maybe he would expect more pay because he is Freddy. But they wanted to leave him out until the last minute. And so there's actually a body double. So I don't know how many of the scenes we see are even Robert Englund himself. Which is
I feel like they tried somebody else and then they realized it was just all wrong. This guy couldn't do it the same way, so they brought him back in.
And I wonder who is in the scene at the pool, because when we see Freddy outside at the pool party, he is terrifying looking to me. I mean, it looks like Robert Englund, but he's got these yellow eyes, his face is a little bit structured differently, and his shoulders are broader. He looks like he has a more athletic build than Robert Englund. So I'm wondering if that had something to do with this whole body double stuff that was going on. Maybe not. Maybe it is Robert Englund. But I thought that was a very terrifying form of Freddy. Like, he usually looks a little different in a, I don't know what kind of way. You know, the way that we're used to. This guy just looked scarier.
So another little fun fact is that Michael J. Fox was considered for this role, but he couldn't because of Back to the Future.
Oh, wow.
I mean, can you imagine Michael J. Fox in this movie? And what kind of movie that would have been?
I actually could, because he's really good at acting nervous. You know, like he could pull off a lot of what Jesse was doing, I think. I mean, I'm sure 100% I'd much rather have Mark Patton, but I could see him pulling it off. It would be kind of weird because he was so huge as Michael P. Keaton at that same time on Family Ties. You know, if we forget about Back to the Future at this moment. You know, it's like he was so huge that it would have been weird to watch someone that popular on TV. It was nice to have a face we didn't know. My next tidbit is that the other people that might have played Jesse were Brad Pitt, Christian Slater, and John Stamos all auditioned to play Jesse.
I just can't imagine John Stamos doing this.
Right. And I mean, his fame came from General Hospital, where he played a character named Blackie, but I don't remember when he started. I'm kind of feeling like he was already Blackie in 1985. So again, it would have been one of these things where the person is already popular, and it would have been really weird to see them in Nightmare on Elm Street. And I don't know what Brad Pitt was doing. Christian Slater, he might have already had a movie by 1985, but it would totally changed everything if any of these guys played him.
Well, I read that Kim Myers was supposedly cast because of her resemblance to Meryl Streep.
Right. I read that as well. And I actually saw a side-by-side of what Meryl Streep would have looked like in 1985. And they do look really similar. They were about the same age.
That's going to have to go to the Instagram page.
Yes, it does.
Side by side.
But except she didn't have that nice red hair, you know. But their faces are very similar in 1985.
They have the same nose. That nose.
Yeah, it's very, very similar. My next tidbit is New Line's president, Bob Shea, played the bartender at the gay bar.
Oh, yeah, I read that. And I believe that he later said that he didn't see anything gay about that. So, okay. I guess the last thing I had was just that Europe loved this movie.
Oh, yeah.
They loved it. That's what I read.
And you know what? I consistently read that about all kinds of movies that, you know, that don't go over well here or whatever, that like they just have this different open mind and approach to their horror.
And maybe they just don't have the same, maybe like there's just something different. Like maybe they don't have the same, I don't know, like the same views, the same societal norms. There's something different about the culture because it's not American culture. So,
right.
I don't know, who knows? But yeah, I've read the same thing.
So what are some of your favorite scenes?
So, of course, one of my favorite scenes is the first scene when Jesse is screaming. I mean, I actually like all of the scenes where he's screaming because I think he has a really great scream. So, for me, every scene that he is screaming is a favorite. What about you?
I agree, but I do also prefer that first scream because, you know, that's the beginning of the movie. Before we meet him, you know, we don't know anything. We don't know it's even a guy. They're in the kitchen. She's eating her racist Fu Manchu cereal, And the parents, the father, and the father's eating tomatoes for breakfast, which I think is great because I often eat tomatoes for breakfast and a lot of people don't. But anyhow, we don't really even know that it's a male who screams at the beginning. So I really like that first scream because it just sets up this whole scene where everybody else is normal, having a normal breakfast, and he is upstairs having a nightmare. My second favorite is when Jesse turns into Freddy, there's an eye that appears in the back of his throat. And I read that was actually played by the special effects guy's girlfriend. That was her role in the movie. It's her eyeball.
Mm. Another one of my favorites is, it feels obvious, but it's the dance scene because I love the song. I love his dancing. I love what he did with it. I read that he was very uncomfortable with it, though. And he didn't really want to do it or didn't know how he was going to do it, but it didn't sound like a great experience for him. But now, in 2019, it's fantastic. I love it. Every second of it.
I also loved it. And I love that, when he pulls that pop gun out, I have that same exact pop gun.
Really?
So that's why I loved it. I'm like, that's my pop gun.
I've never seen whatever that is.
Yeah, I have it. I still have it. It's a pop gun. My last favorite scene is the birds, just for what I had already mentioned before, that it's just really bizarre that they fall asleep and then they become possessed.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually looks real, most of it, when they're flying around and they're, even when they spontaneously combust into flames, it still looks real. So I thought they did that really well for 1985.
Well, I guess a notable scene for me would be at the pool party when he's starting to try to make out with Lisa. I don't know that it's a favorite, but it feels very notable to me because it seems like that's his first real, the first real time where they're trying to become like intimate and make out and whatever, and then it turns into this horrifying thing with like the tongue coming out, and it went back to feeling like he's repressing his gayness, and then he runs away to his friend's house, and that's when he says, "Something is trying to get inside my body." And then the friend is just like, "Well, why are you coming to me?"
Right. Why are you laying on top of me in my bed?
Yeah.
And are they really friends? I mean, like the opening scene, he pulls his pants down and it's like, we don't really know their relationships. Like, are they friends? And he's just being, a teen guy being ridiculous? Or is there like conflict between them and they're not really friends? Because that's how I took it at first. Like, they weren't really friends. So if they're not really friends, why is he now in his bedroom?
I think maybe
it's kind of strange.
Maybe this movie is just doing a poor job at establishing emotional relationships between characters.
Yeah. Yes, I would agree on that.
So another scene that I thought was very notable is when Jesse shows up at Lisa's and he's all bloody, and he's just saying that he's so scared. He's inside me. He wants to take me again. I love his panicked acting. Oh my God, I'm stuttering so much. I loved his panicked acting during that whole thing. It just felt really great. He owns me.
Yes, he does.
Lisa, I killed Snyder. Oh my God. I'm so scared.
Jesse, what are you talking about?
He's inside me. I'm scared.
Jesse, who is doing this to you?
Fred Krueger. He's inside me, and he wants to take me again.
Well, I think this takes us to our awards.
Mm-hmm.
How many do you have?
I have about 5 awards.
And I have 6. So I'll start with mine first. The obvious best scream.
Right, that's my first award too. So I guess that would tie into the next award, which is I would give him an award for being a great scream queen. So that's kind of the same, but...
Right, and that kind of goes with my second one, which is paving the way for other male scream queens, being the originator.
Mm-hmm. Another one is the transformation scene. I love that. I thought it was so good when he is transforming into Freddy.
And I have best strange 80s bedroom. When you're in Grady's bedroom, there's lots of red, black, and white, and geometric shapes, and posters of bands that you don't know. It was like a strange 80s bedroom.
So I guess I have a thing, after doing this podcast, apparently I have a thing for creepy laughs, because another one of my awards was Freddy's laugh after he killed Jesse's friend.
My next award, as I mentioned earlier, was the best evil Freddy. Like, whatever happened at the pool, I don't know, but that Freddy looked very evil. He was a creepy Freddy, and I really appreciated it.
And my last award would go to the dance scene. Of course. I love the dance scene.
Well, I've got 3 more somehow, which is worst special effects ever. Those devil dogs. It's just horrible.
So you give them an award?
I don't know who thought that was, I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Best gay horror, whether it was intentional or not, this is by far the best gay horror movie I've ever seen. And the best school bus. I don't know if you noticed, but that's a 1940s school bus. Who in 1985 is riding a 1940s school bus?
True.
That's too much. That's too much. So I gave it an award.
So now I'm Googling those dogs, and it looks like you can buy little figurines of them.
Oh my gosh.
They're really, really creepy. Which,
well, don't get me that for Christmas.
That might be another thing for Instagram, is, the way these dogs look.
Oh, I'm sure. We can make all kinds of fun stuff out of these dogs. How would you rate this movie?
So I would just go ahead and give it a 3 because, I enjoyed it, and I will probably just keep on watching this movie over time. I don't have any big issues with it.
And I gave it a 3 because, I've watched it, let's say 4 to 6 times over the last year or two. So obviously, I'm still watching. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I'm Amy Ketchum.
And I'm Amy Cassio.
And you've been listening to the AA Horror Highway. Tune in next week as we discuss The Perfection from 2019, starring Allison Williams and Logan Browning. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Patreon at AA Horror Highway. Find us on Twitter at Horror Highway. That's horror, HWY. Also, be sure to take a moment and rate and review us on iTunes. You can find all of our social media links and more by going to horrorhighway.com. That's horror, HWY.com.